as I was reading through the psalm over and over again this week, I thought of a woman named Monica, who back in the year so long ago, 371, was visiting the city of Carthage with her son, who was then 16 years old. Whenever he was there with his mother, he was able to slip away, jump on a merchant ship, and sail away to Rome to begin a life where he could live on his own, where he could do what he wanted to do, where he could get in the trouble that he wanted to get into, where he could learn what he wanted to learn, where he could do whatever he wanted to out of the oversight of his parents. And this mother, Monica, she prayed that that ship would turn around, but it didn't. She prayed that her son would return quickly, but he didn't. However, one day, her son did return. We know this man by the name of Augustine of Hippo. He wrote in his book, The Confessions, "And what did she, my mother, beg of you, my God, with all of those tears, if not that you would prevent me from sailing? But you did not do as she asked. Instead, in the depth of your wisdom, you granted the wish that was even closer to her heart. For she saw that you had granted her far more than she used to ask in her tearful prayers. You converted me to yourself, so that I no longer placed any hope in this world, but stood firmly upon the rule of faith. And you turned her sadness into rejoicing, in her joy far fuller than her dearest wish, far sweeter and more chaste than she had hoped to find." It's a beautiful story, and if you know anything about the man who we often call Saint Augustine of Hippo, he did many wonderful things in his life. He became a very prominent figure in the early church. One of my favorite stories about Augustine is that he and his congregation would go out and they would find slave ships as they were ready to depart laden with slaves, and they would go and they would by force take the slaves off of the ship, and he would say, "I don't know if that's technically right or not, but how my heart says that we should be doing this." And so he would just go and they would do things like that. He wrote beautiful things throughout his writings, such as The City of God and Confessions. And in Confessions, he wrote one of his most famous quotes, that our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you. And yet, whenever he was a young man, he jumped on a ship bound for Carthage, ready to break all bonds of sound reasoning, ready to escape the upbringing and the counsel of a godly mother who prayed that he would stay. And yet God, somehow in his wisdom, somehow in his providence, somehow even through all of the twists and turns of the life that Augustine took, and if you know anything about his young life, it was pretty scandalous, God brought him back to himself. I tell you this story because as we jump into Psalm 3 today, the setting of Psalm 3 is from David fleeing from his son Absalom. He is running away, not sure if he will ever see the city of Jerusalem again, not sure even if he will see the next day or not. So I ask, what do we do when it seems like all the good that we had hoped for is sailing off over the horizon? What do we do when it feels like we're in a vehicle going 100 miles an hour in the opposite direction from all that God has planned and promised us, all that we had hoped for? What do we do when the struggles of life have us looking in the rearview mirror, seeing all the things that we were planning on fading into the distance? That's what Psalm 3 speaks of. David, in his relationship with God, tells us exactly what that looks like and exactly how we should respond to these situations. So if you'll turn with me to the third Psalm, starting in verse 1. "O my Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising up against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God." Selah. This comes again from the time, if you read the superscription of this verse, a psalm of David when he fled from Absalom his son. And if we look at this story itself, it's found in 2 Samuel chapter 15 as David is fleeing from Absalom. If you know, Absalom is the son of David, very handsome, long, beautiful, flowing hair. And all of the people of Israel turned their hearts to him. And they said, we want you to be the king instead of David. And so we read in 2 Samuel chapter 15, starting in verse number 13, that a messenger came to David saying, the hearts of the men of Israel have gone after Absalom. And then David said to all of his servants who were with him in Jerusalem, arise and let us flee, or else there will be no escape for us from Absalom. Go quickly, lest he overtake us quickly and bring us down to ruin on us and strike the city with the edge of the sword. Again, sometimes we can read the Bible and it can seem stale because of the way that we read it. We just read through like, and David got a message that his son was trying to kill him and was like, hey, we should leave. Like, but that's not the way that this is happening in the story. Like, could you put yourself in David's shoes for just a second? You're the king of Israel. Right? Absalom is your son. He's your son who until recently had been very estranged from you. He had been exiled from the kingdom. You have just in the last few years brought him back and reestablished him into the kingdom. And now all of a sudden, seemingly out of the blue, one of your messengers comes and says, hey, you know your son Absalom? Like, oh yeah, he's going to kill you. And he's bringing all of Israel, the people, the nation that you're king over, he's bringing them to overthrow you and to dethrone you and to make sure that he now sits in your place. That's a bad message. I don't know if you've ever, maybe got like a letter from the IRS that's saying that you owe back taxes. Like that's a bad letter. But I think this might be a little bit worse, that your messenger just shows up, says, hey, king, by the way, your son wants to kill you. The people of Israel have turned against you, and you have just a few minutes to gather literally everything that you need and flee the city before ruin comes upon you. Now, if we remember the promises that God made to David, we remember that God promised him that he would sit on the throne of Israel, that he would rule over the people, that should he be faithful to the Lord, then he would be established in Jerusalem. And now what do we see? David, the man who has received so many promises from the Lord, the man who has been so faithful in so many ways to God, his God, is now about to put the city of Jerusalem into his rearview mirror and run for his life. As we continue to read in 2 Samuel, in verse number 24 now, we see that David is also going to be faced with a temptation as he is now fleeing the city, as he's taking his mighty men and those still faithful and loyal to him, and he is going to hightail it away from his son. He is going to be tempted with something. And we read this in verse number 24. And Abiathar, and behold, Zadok came with all the Levites bearing the ark of the covenant of God. And they set down the ark of God until the people had all passed out of the city. And then the king said to Zadok, carry the ark of God back into the city. If I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me back and let me see both it and his dwelling place. But if he says, I have no pleasure in you, behold, here I am. Let him do what seems good to me. So David had the temptation of the priests and the Levites coming out, and they're bearing the Ark of the Covenant, and they're like, hey, David, you're the king. We can just take the Ark with us. We can just take it and go. And then it's like, haha, you don't have the presence of God with you anymore. We got the presence of God with us. What are you going to do, right? But David had this understanding that God was working something that he might not fully understand. And he said, you know what? Take the Ark back to Jerusalem. And if God finds pleasure in me, and if God finds favor in me, and if God is going to fulfill his promises to me, then he's going to do it. And if not, then whatever he does is going to be good. So take the ark back, and we will see what the Lord will do. David, even seeing the blessings that he had been promised and the very presence of God now fading back into his rearview mirror with the city of Jerusalem, chose to trust God instead of trying to hijack his plan. And I love this scene in the life of David because we also see that another king of Israel hijacked part of what he thought God's plan was. Remember King Saul? A little bit before, big, tall Saul. We read about him as we were going through scripture as a whole in the narrative of the Bible. And as God said, Saul, I have no favor in you because you have disobeyed me, and I have instead anointed another to be king. What was Saul's response? Oh, no, you don't, God. I get to choose who's king. I'm on the throne. I have the crown. I will do as I please. And we see that Saul's life begins to devolve and to fall apart as he is now tormented over and over again by evil spirits, as he is holding so tightly to the crown, as he is chasing after David, trying to kill him, as he has no confidence in what the Lord is doing, even to the point of going to necromancers and those practicing witchcraft in order to get answers because heaven is closed to him, because he refuses to surrender to the will of God. And I think David saw what happened whenever Saul held so tightly to what he thought was his and refused to let the Lord do what he was going to do. And he saw that the Lord did what he was going to do anyways. And so David in this episode, instead of saying, yes, let's take the ark of God, let's take the ark of the covenant, and this is going to be an advantage to us, and we can use this in battle, and we can say now, hey, we have the ark of the covenant. If you want to have the presence of God, then you need to follow after us. Instead, he simply said, what God will do, he will do, and I'm going to trust him. As we continue through this story from David, we read that not only was he tempted with taking the ark, but now that he has overcome that temptation, that the trials are going to keep coming. It's not bad enough that he's fleeing Jerusalem, running from his own son. It's not bad enough that he had to leave in haste and couldn't take all the things that he wanted to take. It's not bad enough that he doesn't know if he's going to make it through the night. But now there is a man who is going to specifically begin to insult David. In verse number 30, we read this, but David went up to the ascent of the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went, barefoot and with his head covered, and the people with him had their heads covered, and they went up weeping as they went. So again, you just have this procession of tears and frustration and confusion as David and those with him are ascending the Mount of Olives again from just a few weeks ago, the same mount where Jesus himself would struggle in the garden, the same mount where Jesus himself would say, not my will, but your will be done. We see David saying, God, I don't know what your will is, but you're going to work it out. And in the midst of this, a man comes. When David came to bear him, there came out a man of the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera. And he came out and he cursed continually, and he threw stones at David and at all the servants of King David. And all the people and the mighty men were on his right hand and on his left. And Shimei said as he cursed, get out, you man of blood, you worthless man. The Lord has avenged on you the blood of all the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. And now the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. See, all of your evil is now on you, for you are a man of blood. This is the definition of adding insult to injury. He's already leaving Jerusalem. He's already leaving the ark of God. He's already unsure what the future holds, even the immediate future. And now out comes this man casting insults and stones at him, telling him, you deserve every bit of what you are getting. Have you ever felt like you were in a season of life that seemed a little bit like that? You were going through difficulties and troubles and trials, and you were just trying to make it through, and then all of a sudden you get hit with a curveball out of nowhere, and it just is like a gut punch. And you're just like, really? On top of everything else, now I have to deal with this too. Another great man from church history felt very much the same way. His name is Charles Spurgeon. Many of you know I quote Charles Spurgeon often. I love it because he's got some great quotes and he's got such an interesting life. But many people don't know that Charles Spurgeon, while he was often referred to as the Prince of Preachers, while he would often speak to tens of thousands of people at a time preaching the gospel, while he was well known and while he cared for orphans and the downtrodden in the city of London, he was also often stricken with deep deep depression. That not only was he suffering from mental illness, but he was also suffering from severe physical illness. He had every year often have to lay aside weeks at a time where he would do absolutely nothing because he was so bedridden. He lived in great physical pain for a large portion of his life. He suffered from, at one point, smallpox. He had gout. He had rheumatism. He had Blight's disease, which is an inflammation of the kidneys. And it all became progressively worse, so that in the last 22 years of his ministry, when you say the last 22 years of your ministry, that's a long time, right? So for 22 years of his ministry, he spent the vast majority of his time actually away from the pulpit because the physical hardship took a great toll on him. And yet one of my favorite quotes from Spurgeon is speaking about one of these dark nights of the soul, where he says, "I have learned to kiss the wave that strikes me against the rock of ages." Charles Spurgeon understood that all of the things that he struggled with, that all of the things that he was suffering, that all of the hardships that he was enduring were also, in their own way, bringing him to a greater understanding of who God is. And David, I think, in Psalm 3 is understanding this same thing. Because again, remember, this is not written after David has now had victory over Absalom. It's not written after David is now sitting in Jerusalem saying, okay, everything turned out okay. This was written by David as he was fleeing from Absalom, his son. And this is what we read in verse 3. "But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory and the lifter of my head. I cried aloud to the Lord, and he answered me from his holy hill." David, even in the midst of all of his trouble and all of his trials, even as his own son is pursuing him, seeking to kill him. Literally right now, we know as you read through 2 Samuel, they are plotting to end David's life, saying, how can we kill David? How can we reconcile Israel and bring it all under the control and the rule of Absalom? And we see that in here, this episode, how deeply David knows the character and the nature of God. Remember, this isn't the first time that David's had to flee from someone seeking his life, from someone trying to keep him off the throne. For 15 years, David fled from Saul, dodging him at every corner, living far away from the city where he hoped to be, living away from his own people, surviving off of his wits and the grace and the providence of God, over and over again, having to dodge Saul and his attacks on him. And so now as David is leaving the city, he has that to look back on and to say, what happened whenever God made me a promise and Saul said, it's never going to happen? Who was right, God or Saul? It was God. Just so you know, spoiler alert if you haven't read that part of the Bible yet, it was God. And as we look here, as David writes, even as he is fleeing from Absalom, before God has come through, before God has written the end of the story, before God has revealed to David how he would work all of these things out, before David is delivered from trouble, he still recognizes God as the shield that is about him, as the lifter of his head, and as the one who, whenever David cries to him, he is faithful to answer, because David knew who God was. David looked back at his experiences with God, and over again, he could say, yes, God came through. Yes, God delivered. Yes, God was faithful to his promise to me. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie Jurassic Park. Maybe you've seen it. If you haven't, it's a fun movie. But the original movie Jurassic Park that came out before Chris Pratt and everything, like back in the 90s, literally my room was painted with dinosaurs because I loved Jurassic Park back in the day. But there's a scene in Jurassic Park as they are trying to outrun the T-Rex in their Jeep, and they have the pedal to the metal and they are driving away. And Jeff Goldblum's character looks into the side view mirror, and there is this Tyrannosaurus running after them with his little arms, arms, and he's just sprinting after them with his giant open maw, trying to bite down on them. And it's funny because at the bottom of the mirror, there is the words, "Objects in the mirror are closer than they appear." It's terrifying, right? When you think about a Tyrannosaurus Rex chasing after you and it seems so close, and you look back and it says, "And they're closer than they appear." But I think about that with God's mercy as it pursues us. David later in the 23rd Psalm will say, "Surely goodness and mercy will follow me. They will pursue me all the days of my life." And so sometimes when we're looking into the rearview mirror and we're thinking that everything that we wanted, everything that we desired, everything that we had hoped for is fading into the background, if we just avert our gaze a little bit to that side view mirror, I think we're going to see the Tyrannosaurus Rex of God's grace and mercy chasing after us with those words, "Objects in the mirror are closer than they appear." The grace and the mercy and the providence of God are always at hand for his people. Now, I want you to have that picture in your mind next time that you're facing something, right? And you're driving down the road and you're frustrated with whatever. Look in the side view mirror and think, the Tyrannosaurus Rex of grace is coming after me as God is pursuing me with his goodness and his mercy. David knew this to be true. David knew a great truth that every single one of us need to learn, that our future is not determined by our present circumstances, but our future is determined by his past. Our future is not determined by our present circumstances and the things that we are currently facing. Our future is determined by the past of Christ, what he has already paid, the victory that he has already won, the price that is already marked, paid in full, that we might be fully reconciled to God. So we never have to ask the question, is God for us? Because he has shown emphatically and without doubt that he is the Tyrannosaurus grace chasing after us with his mercy, with his love, and with his kindness. And we stand firmly in his favor. And David knew this. And as we go through and we continue to read through Psalm 3, we see this beauty continuing to unfold. "I lay down and slept, and I woke again, for the Lord sustained me." Again, if we look back at the book of 2 Samuel, we're going to see that there was an advisor of Absalom. And this advisor had said, "Hey, listen, David and his men are tired. And very soon David's going to lay down and he's going to go to sleep. And if we right now leave with a small band of men, we can run up on David, and while he is sleeping, we can thrust a spear through him and we can end his life. And then all of Israel will be reconciled to you, King Absalom." Even at that moment that David is writing this, there is literally a group that is seeking to end his sleep, end his life. And yet what does David say? "I lay down and slept, and I woke again, for the Lord sustains me." He realized it wasn't the great strength of his mighty men who had done so many mighty deeds. It wasn't his own great strength in slaying Goliath and in doing all of the things that he had done throughout his life. But if he were to go to sleep that night, if he was going to wake up the next morning, it was only going to be because of the providence and the goodness and the grace of God. And so now David writes his confidence as he says, "I will not be afraid of many thousands of people who have set themselves against me all around. Arise, O Lord. Save me, O my God. For you strike all of my enemies on the cheek. You break the teeth of the wicked. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing be on your people." David in this psalm reminds us of the beautiful truth that whenever the world is falling apart around us, that whenever we don't understand what God could possibly be doing, that whenever we don't have a grip on what life is throwing at us, that whenever insult is being added to injury, that whenever difficulty is being stacked upon difficulty, that whenever it looks like we are fleeing now from all the things that God has promised us, from all the good that we had hoped would happen, from all of the hopes and the dreams of our lives, and it seems like they're fading away into the rear view, it is God who is sustaining us. It is God who has a plan, and it is God who will ultimately work these things for our good. Do we remember that whenever we're going through hard times? Do we remember that whenever work is hard? Do we remember that whenever parenthood is hard? Do we remember that whenever things that we really want to happen don't happen? Do we remember that whenever illnesses keep us from doing things that we would love to do? Do we remember that whenever we get passed over for promotions? Do we remember that whenever life and the things that we desire don't come about like we wanted them to? Do we remember that God is working all things for our good? And can I tell you maybe a secret that we need to remember? And it's a secret that has to do with glory. That oftentimes, one of the reasons that we struggle so much, that we go through difficulties, that we go through situations that are so hard, so complex, and so difficult that only God can figure them out, is because many of us are so confident, so capable, so able, so physically strong, so whatever, that if we were to go through a situation that we could fix, we would fix it and we would take all the glory. If we were to go through a situation that we would be able to handle, we would handle it, and then we would be like, look how cool I am. Look how good I am. Look how fantastic I am. And whenever God allows us to go through the difficulties of life, to go through the hardships of life, to go into situations where we say, I cannot fix it, and yet somehow we come out the other end and it's fixed, it's to remind us that He is the one who gets the glory. That He is the one who gets the glory, and we are the ones who get the good. He is the one who gets the glory, and we are the ones who get the good. I want to remind you of just one more verse as we close out today. And this verse is from the book of Malachi, chapter 3, verse number 3. It's one of my favorite verses because it's one of my favorite pictures of God. As we look through the psalm and we see David fleeing from Absalom, how many are his foes? Literally arrayed against him are all the armies of Israel, that Absalom seeks his life, and yet he believes that God has a plan. In Malachi 3, verse 3, it says this: He will sit as a refiner and a purifier of silver. He will purify the sons of Levi and refine them like gold and silver, and they will bring offerings in righteousness to the Lord. The thing that I love most about that verse is that it shows God sitting. Not like in an anxious posture, like standing and hovering over. Like, have you ever tried to cook a really complicated recipe and you're really scared that you're going to burn it or that you're going to mess it up, and so you're constantly tending to it and you feel like you can't stop stirring the pot, you feel like you can't stop watching it, because if you do, you're going to turn around and 2 seconds later, it's not going to be a souffle, it's going to be a stew. Hey, what happened to that, right? And so you're worried about what's going on the stove all the time, and you're just kind of constantly having anxiety over it. But the picture of God as He's purifying us, as He's bringing us to a place of sanctification, as He's working out all of these subtle things in the background that we might find His salvation, we see Him sitting. Not standing, not pacing, not hovering, not anxious in any way about whether we're going to make it out, about whether we're really going to be sanctified through this, about whether it's going to turn out for good or not, but instead God sits. Even as we're in the fire being purified, even as the dross and the junk in our life is raising to the top and being removed, even as the difficulties in life and the troubles of life assail us, God sits, not anxious, not frustrated, not concerned, but knowing the good that will come out from all of the trials of life. In Psalm 3, David writes this song as he runs away from Absalom, his son. Not sure if he'll ever see Jerusalem again. Not sure if he'll ever return to the tabernacle to worship again. Not sure if he'll ever be able to be in the assembly of the people of Israel praising the Lord again, but trusting that whatever God did with his life would be good. We know the outcome of this circumstance, that even though David was a very capable man, it was God who caught Absalom by the hair in a tree. That even though David was a very capable man, it was God who worked out all of the counsels of Absalom's advisors that they might come against him. Even though David was a very capable man. He could not get himself out of this situation, but God could, and God did. And what he once left in the rearview mirror with the city of Jerusalem and the house of God and the people of Israel, thinking he may never see it again, was fully restored to him. And in our lives, whenever we feel like we're running away and what's in the rearview mirror is quickly fading and we may never see it again, can I give you the confidence that David gives us in this psalm that salvation belongs to the Lord? That God is the one who is orchestrating and working all things, that by his providence, he will bring you through. That even whenever it seems like there is no good to be had from a situation, that Tyrannosaurus Grace is chasing after you with his mercy and his goodness and his steadfast love. And whenever we look in the rearview mirror, what we should see is the cross of Jesus Christ. Knowing that no matter how far we run, no matter how far we drive, no matter what the circumstances and the situations of life throw at us, if we turn around, we'll always find ourselves in the shadow of that cross and in the mercy and the love of our God. Would you pray with me? Lord, we thank you for the book of Psalms. We thank you for the testimony of David, even as he is facing hardship and trial, even as he doesn't know what the outcome will be, even as he is trusting you to do what you will, even if that doesn't seem like what he wants to happen. Lord, he remembers that even though his foes are many, that you are a shield around him and the lifter of his head. He remembers that even though those who pursue him seek his life, that you are the one who will satisfy him with sleep and with a future. That even though the future seems uncertain, you, Lord, are the one whose salvation belongs to. And you will bring him out and you will restore him. And the same is true in our lives, Lord God. While we might not be facing actual war, Lord, in the physical sense, Lord, there are so many things that this world would throw at us. There are so many frustrations and heartaches. There are so many times that our hearts break and ache for the things that we had hoped for, the things that we had wished for, the future that we believe you have promised us. So, Lord, never let us lose hope, but let us always remember that salvation comes from the Lord, and you will do good to us. In your name we pray. Amen.